Hey guys, and welcome to my full spoiler review breakdown of The Rings of Power Season 2. If you've seen my episode reviews of this season, you would know that I am no fan of this show. In fact, I kind of despise it and I kind of hate what it's been doing with the whole story. It is just so messed up on so many levels. I can't get into all of them today, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to focus on what I've narrowed down to the 7 main storylines of this show, and I'm going to talk about broadly what's going on with each of them and why each of them just doesn't work. I really cannot find any kind of saving graces with this show, and so I want to go through each of the 7 main storylines and break them down for you to explain everything wrong with this show. As a reference, the 7 main storylines that I've broken it down into is starting off with the Halfwoods and the Stranger, then you've got the Men of the South, and then you have Numor, you have the Dwarves and Khazad-dûm, you then have Adar and the Orcs, you have essentially Galadriel and Elrond and Gil-galad, and then you have Sauron and Celebrimbor in Eregion. If you think that's a lot, that's because it is. No show should have 7 concurrent storylines going at once. It is ridiculous. This show needs to be chopped down, and it actually showed some evidence of doing that this season, where they kind of reduced the story time and the screen time of certain characters within the show, and I'm going to talk about them today. But really, 7 storylines is way too much, but we're going to start with the first, with the Stranger and the Halfwoods. So you have obviously Nori and Poppy, who are accompanied by the Stranger, who is technically Gandalf. This is a spoiler now. He is revealed to officially be Gandalf. Not that we didn't know already. It was ridiculous. But that was the big thing. So they're helping him find his way, and he's trying to figure out who he is and what his role is, what his purpose is. And they're going on an adventure through Rune. And they get split off a few episodes into the season. And basically, the Stranger ends up in the company of Tom Bombadil. Broadly speaking, without getting into all the details of all of that, the first point I want to make is I'm doing this in order. This storyline is by far the most irrelevant to the show. It is the most boring and is nonsense, and it does not have any place or have any real bearing on what this show is about. This show is called The Rings of Power. It should be about the Rings of Power, mainly focused on them. You can have 2 or 3 other storylines, sure, but it should be mainly focused on that. And instead we waste so much time talking about this Stranger and who he is and these Halfwoods that we could not care less about. You have Nori and Poppy, who are essentially Frodo and Sam for this show. They run into this group called the Stewarts, who are like another group of Halfwoods, but in a whole other place in Middle-earth. And my God, all the screen time that they have, it is reduced this season. I'll give them credit for that. They did reduce the Halfwood screen time significantly this season. That must have been based on feedback. But all the time spent with these Stewarts was completely meaningless to the overall story. Nothing is going to come of it. In fact, we know what's going to come of it, and they might as well just skip to that or just have it as a footnote, which is basically these people are going to be the founding fathers of the Shire. I bet my bottom dollar this is what it's going to lead to. Whether it's that whole group or just Nori and Poppy being the main ancestors, whatever, it's going to be them who create and found the Shire. Waste of time. We do not care. Nothing that happens amongst them is of any interest. The relationship between Poppy and that other guy, who cares? They share a kiss at one point, and it's meant to be some sort of profound moment. It's not. It's not built up, and then after that they don't share any other chemistry for the rest of the season. It's nothing. And then you have Nori, who's essentially, without the Stranger, she didn't have much purpose to begin with, but without the Stranger she has no purpose. I mean, untethered from him, her whole goal is making sure he's okay. That's her whole purpose in the show, is making sure that he is okay. But now that he's on his own and he's found Tom Bombadil, she doesn't know this obviously, but he's going to be stronger and he's going to be fine, obviously, if he's Gandalf. So what is her purpose now? And they're kind of hinting at with the end of this season that it seems like they might be sidelining them even further, if not removing them from the show altogether. And I mentioned Tom Bombadil, and I want to talk about him further. So the Stranger obviously encounters him, and Tom Bombadil kind of mentors him a bit into finding who he is. Tom Bombadil from the books is this whimsical, kind of eccentric character who's full of life, very jolly, and that he sings his songs, and he kind of he's living in a world of his own. In this one, he's just this boring, dour, not dour, but sort of just like no charisma, no personality, nothing. He just says lines in a monotonous way, and that's it. There's no joy to him. He's only Tom Bombadil in name. There's nothing about him that otherwise resembles the Tom Bombadil, the one that I at least remember from the Fellowship of the Ring book. It's day and night. So I don't understand. One of the main complaints about this show is that none of the characters have any distinct personality. They just do whatever the story needs them to do. Well, here was your chance to introduce a character who is bursting with personality, and he had none. He was just completely devoid of it. He was boring and just, yeah, as irrelevant as the Half-Orcs, essentially. And then at the very end, you know, when Gandalf comes back to him with officially finding his name, which, by the way, one of the worst moments of the season, when Gandalf gets his name from someone calling him a grand elf. I mean, this level of writing is just ridiculous here. But he's now Gandalf, and he comes in and they start singing the song together, and that ends their story for the season. It's mind-boggling who wrote this. Like, this is not even child's like storytelling. This is beyond, way below that. Children are capable of way better than this. This is like just atrocious on every level. And of course, with the mystery of the stranger over, that he is now Gandalf, you know, big surprise there. We now have another one that they're introducing, this stupid mystery box storytelling where you have this dark wizard who everyone's asking now, who's the dark wizard going to be? Ooh, it's got to be one of the 5 main wizards. It's most likely going to be Saruman. And if it is Saruman, it doesn't make sense that they're introducing him as this like sort of antagonizing figure when he has a fall. He is a good figure, a force for good, until he falls thousands of years later. But they're already introducing him as this dark figure. Now, I don't know for certain he's going to be Saruman, but it seems stupid. If it is him, it doesn't make sense. If it's not him and it turns out to be someone else, it's just rubbish mystery box storytelling that no one has any interest in. Moving on to the Men of the South, namely the main characters there are Erondir, the Black Elf, and then you have Isildur, obviously the son of Elendil, who is destined to cut the ring from Sauron in the Battle of the Last Alliance. So he is a key character, and he's really sidelined in this show. Obviously, he's going to get more screen time as it comes along, as what we're all assuming this show will culminate in the Battle of the Last Alliance. But he's really sidelined at the moment, during a time when they should really be building him up, and they're not doing anything interesting with him whatsoever. He's just almost a damsel in distress half the time, and the other half he's just kind of fighting his way through against random orcs. He doesn't have any main purpose at this time. He's just dawdling off in the south doing nothing, when they could be having him doing genuinely interesting things. And obviously he shouldn't even be around yet at this timeline. He should be coming thousands of years from now, because he's only a man. But they've squished this all together, this timeline, so it is what it is. But the main thing about him is that this actor, the actor playing him, I'm not going to say he's a bad actor, but he's working with what they've given him, but he has no gravitas. You trying to tell me that this guy is the guy that we're meant to believe is the brave enough one to cut the ring from Sauron? He seems very timid a lot of the time. He's not convincing as a hero. Now, he could build up to that, but they haven't done any of that work so far. They've just been dragging him along. It's almost like they just want the name Isildur to exist in this show as a character, so that people can latch onto that and be like, oh yeah, I remember the Isildur from the prologue scene of Lord of the Rings. And so that's all it really is. They want that name recognition because there's not enough of them in this timeline for the show. They need them. They're the Galadriels, the Elrons, Elendils, etc. But that's all I really see about him, is just name recognition, but a meaningless character. And yes, they've given him the relationship with Estrid, who's sort of a questionable figure, but there's, again, much like the relationship between Poppy and that store, there's no serious development in their relationship together, that by the time they do kiss, there's no weight to it. And this show, it's quintessential of this show that they want to skip the main steps that is required to take so that you can earn a payoff. Having a kiss between characters is a payoff. There is no lead up or setup to it that you feel some genuine chemistry and drama between them, where you feel like it's earned. This show does not earn any of the things that they do. They skip ahead. They skip significant parts, or even worse, they make the characters do something that should not be done at all, just because it serves their plot. And then there's Arondir. Poor Arondir. Well, the character of his show, his basic purpose is 2 things. One, they want their Legolas for this show. Just some elf that can do badass things and kill orcs in cool acrobatic ways. But then on top of that, on a more deeper level, if you want, his main purpose was going to be a love story with Bronwyn, and I think would have been the eventual reveal as him as the father of young Theo, who's also lost the purpose in the show, and that's because both of them have lost the main character in Bronwyn. Why did they lose her? Because the actress decided to depart the show, so they had to write her out of it. So she was meant to have survived at the end of last season from her wounds, but then it turns out no, she actually died. He's lost all purpose now, Arondir, in this show. He literally spends most of the season just running through the wilderness to finally arrive at the Battle of Eregion. So they don't know what to do with him, and there at the end of this season, he's there standing amongst the most key important people of Middle Earth at that time, with Galadriel, Gil-galad, and and Elrond. He's standing there with them, commanding who they're living for, their survivors, as if he's this important figure. He's not. He's just an elf who's lost all purpose, and he's just good at shooting arrows. That's it. But they've really pushed him up further than what he's meant to be and what he's earned. And then there's Numor. So this one should be one of the most interesting storylines in the show, because it is really like kind of a biblical tale of the fall of this people, this great race of people, and they fall because, like, for sort of biblical reasons, but it's devoid of all that. We're starting to see the beginnings of the fall of Numor, which will happen eventually in the show, spoilers, but the lead up to that is just not earned and not sufficiently set up. Like, for example, the change of power between Miriel and Pharazôn doesn't make sense, because there's this whole kind of thing going on in a room that with all the other people around, where they're kind of trying to decide their leader, and he happens to be standing near the ledge where an eagle happens to land in, which they determine as their leader. So it wasn't that the eagle picked him, it's that he happened to be standing at the right spot at the right time. If she was standing there, Miriel, she would have been picked by the eagle, and then they would have worshipped her. So it's just really does not make sense. It's not a real way that people pick their leaders. It's really stupid. But that's one of the starting off points of my issues with Numor. One of the other biggest issues as well is Elendil. So we all know the name Elendil from The Last Alliance, and he dies trying to kill Sauron. He's the father of Isildur. He has no agency in the show. He doesn't know what to do. He has no purpose. He's just being pushed around by everyone around him. He goes to Miriel for every answer. He doesn't know what to do, and she has to tell him to do everything, to the point that she has to be the one that gives him Narsil, that gives him the sword that will eventually cut the ring from Sauron's hand. So he's not earning anything on his own. Everything is being given to him, or he's begging people for help with everything. He's like a pathetic character. And again, it's the same issue with the Isildur, where we cannot believe the gravitas that he should be required to, that as the man who will be leading the Last Alliance. And then there's the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm, and I have some positive things to say about this one. First one is the relationship between Durin the Third and Durin the Fourth, I think, is really good. I think they've, to me, come across as the most believable characters within the universe of this show. The way they talk, their interactions, their dialogue seems the most realistic. It's not perfect by any means. I wouldn't even say it's good, but it's better than most by far. And so they do feel the most genuine and authentic to this universe. The other compliment I will give is the relationship between Durin and Disa. Whilst I cannot stand Disa's character at all, I will admit that some of the interactions that they have together are reminiscent of interactions between husband and wives in this day and age. As a married man myself, I know what it's like. You have those back and forths with your wife, and the wife is always right, happy wife, happy life, all that kind of stuff. They do play into a lot of that, and there are some nice moments of those exchanges between them, but they're few and far between, but they are there, and I will give credit where it's due. Now to the issues with the whole dwarf storyline. There's that hallway that leads to where the dwarves are trying to go to dig. So much happens in that hallway. Like, there's the one scene where Disa's there standing in the way, and she starts to sing and unleashes the bats on them, and the dwarves go scurrying away. Firstly, why the hell would dwarves who dig in mines be scared of a few bats? It's ridiculous. But still, that was their whole plan, is to guard that hallway. Just her and Durin, and against any amounts of dwarves, they're meant to fight back. Two of them are going to repel everyone. Does not make sense. But then later on, we see that a fight is breaking out where King Durin has killed a lot of his own men, and it's just all happening kind of in that hallway. I don't get it. That tunnel, it's really stupid. But then going on to the most ridiculous part is that for 2 seasons they've been building up to the Balrog, the reveal of the Balrog, that the dwarves digging too greedily and too deep, and it's finally going to unleash him. He's unleashed for 2 minutes, and the only person who fights him is King Durin. He jumps at him ridiculously to fight him, and it shows them clash, their axes or whatever clash, and that's it. And we don't see that or hear from the Balrog again at all this season. But in fact, it's referenced that the dwarves, the Balrog just kind of went away. Why on earth would he come all the way up just for that quick fight and then gone? Like, he's there now. Like, I could not understand that. There was no scale or scope to that whatsoever. Who thought of this? To me, it's an editing nightmare, because they clearly have been building up to this, and then they have that 1-2 minute scene with the Balrog, and that's it, never mentioned again. So if we do get it again next season, it's going to be like, well, where the hell was it in that gap? Like, none of it makes sense. Then there's the storyline of Adar and the Orcs, who are out to kill Sauron, but also waging the siege on Eregion. So I'll give credit where it first was due. They had a change of actor of Adar in the first season. I don't know the names of the actors. In the first season, the actor who played him was probably the best actor in the show in the first season. And I will say that the actor playing him now in season 2 might also be one of the best actors in this show as well. So credit where it's due. They've managed that character well despite the recast and that. But kind of further evidence that a bunch of actors in the show did not want anything to do with it after season 1. But nevertheless, what I will talk about with this is one of the things I hated most about the season was the humanizing of the Orcs. I can't understand it. Why were they trying to humanize them, give them families, make them kind of like figures that you sympathize with? It doesn't make sense. Orcs are not meant to be sympathized with. They are meant to be monsters, creatures that have no regard for anyone or anything, and they're the bad guys. But the show wants to be ambiguous. I hate this kind of new way of thinking that can't just have good or evil. Everything's sort of gray area in the middle. And this is playing into that way of thinking, that sort of nihilistic look on life, that there's no real good, there's no real evil. Everyone's just sort of somewhere in the middle. Another issue with Adar and the Orcs is when it came to the Battle of Eregion, the size of their army was not properly conveyed at all. Now, this is not a specific issue with the story of the Adar and the Orcs, but more so just an issue with the stories, like filming, the way they captured that battle. At no point did we get a full scale like image of the Orcs attacking them. They were just sort of scattered the whole time, and it always felt like the same 5 or 6 Orcs who were everywhere leading all the attacks. There was no sense of size at all with this battle, and it was a real shame because they clearly put a lot of money into building and constructing that battle, but they did not capture it or edit it well at all. And then there's the story of the Elves of Lindon, essentially, which you've got Galadriel, Elrond, and King Gil-galad. So Galadriel, to the show's credit, they reduced her role quite significantly, I would say, this season. She was, front and center with everything in season 1, but she felt slightly diminished, especially once she got captured by the Orcs. It was almost like their way of like kind of removing her from the story for a bit, because they knew how unpopular she was and how badly she was received in the first season. So whatever, it doesn't make the show better, but it's just like less worse, if that makes sense. But yeah, it was kind of a nice reprieve to not have as much of her and not have her being as insufferable as she was in the first season. But that said, she still had a ton of plot armor in the show. It was ridiculous. Like, so many times when the Orcs had her, they didn't have her in handcuffs at all. She's their prisoner, and they never had her in handcuffs. And one time she literally, as soon as they open the cage that they've got her in, she just jumps out and starts attacking. It's like, what? I saw it coming a million miles away, and they don't have her in handcuffs. I don't understand it. Like, they have minds. They exist in this universe. And then on top of that, there was some moments when they're fighting the Orcs in that forest where the Orcs they were clearly archers there, they showed them, and then as soon as she starts fighting or arrives, they just stop shooting all of a sudden. It's like perfect, like terrible fight choreography, really, where it's just letting the good guy live because they need them to live, and let them do their thing and fight without actually, utilizing the surroundings when there should be other bad guys engaging them. Instead, they just conveniently stop. And then there's Elrond, who's been the most kind of pessimistic this season, because he's the only one like being scared of warning them about the rings, using the rings when Galadriel and Gil-galad you want to use them, and he's warning them this whole time, and he's being proven right as it goes along. But nevertheless, he comes leading an army to Eregion to assist them with aid. And it came to my sense, I realized later on, I'm like, why is he leading the charge? It showed Gil-galad there later on the battlefield. Why wasn't he? He's the king. Why isn't he leading the charge? But it had Elrond. So that was just a little thing that didn't make sense. But then you have Elrond later on in the battle, and they're leading the charge, and before they complete it, they stop because they see Galadriel there on the front line, and instead they go to make terms. So he goes to meet with Adar in the Orcs area, and they can't agree on anything, and then just nothing makes sense. He's walking out of there, and the Orcs are like, oh, we're gonna kill you now, but they're like, they could just kill him. They didn't agree to anything, so I don't know why they didn't just kill him then and there. The point of those exchanges is to agree to terms, but they didn't agree to anything, and instead they just let him walk, and then he gets far away enough, and then he starts killing Orcs again. So just none of that made any sense, and has no real understanding of how battles actually work. And I touched on Gil-galad, but he's got to be the most sidelined character in the show. He should be one of the most main important characters in the show, but he gets sidelined all the time. When he should be making the decision. Instead, you got Galadriel making the calls, you got Elrond, other people doing all sorts of things, and he's just kind of standing in that same stupid courtyard doing nothing. And he's just so sidelined when he is going to be one of the main people leading the last alliance when that comes. But here he's meant to be leading the army again, but they don't show him doing that. It's just really sidelined. I don't understand why, because here you have a character who should be really powerful, really strong in his ability as a soldier, and they're just not taking advantage of any of that. And then it comes to the final and probably main storyline of this season, which is between Sauron and Celebrimbor in Eregion and the forging of the rings. So here, I will say this, I think the two actors playing Sauron and Celebrimbor are acting their butts off. They're doing a really good job. The script isn't doing them any favors whatsoever, but they are doing a really good job of just conveying emotion and being and embodying their characters and playing off one another. And I can understand why some people are appreciating it. I'm not. I have issues with it, and I'm going to talk about them now. So starting off with Sauron, his power levels are really inconsistent in the show, and they've just proven it with this season, because they've shown what he can do with his mind, the way he can trick Celebrimbor into basically seeing something else in his surroundings, just a complete illusion around him. And then at the same time, show his ability to kill soldiers, you trick them into basically killing themselves, like really powerful stuff. But then at the same time, he's there and he's taking on Galadriel and he can't kill her. Like, he's fighting her and they're going toe to toe with one another. Doesn't make sense. The power levels are inconsistent. He's trying to kill her. He stabs her with Morgoth's helmet. And yet, so why didn't he just use one of his other powers to do something, make her kill herself? The power levels do not make sense with him, and they don't know how to control them. And another issue with Sauron and Celebrimbor is that Sauron's basically holding him hostage, and as Celebrimbor starts to come to his senses towards the end of the season, Sauron doesn't do anything to make sure to guard him and make sure he's still forging the rings. He leaves him to his own devices so much, and every time he tries to do something to escape or whatever, it doesn't, they didn't think of that. This is basic storytelling. If you are holding a man captive, you can't do the stereotypical villain thing where you just trust them to not escape. It's really stupid, really poorly written stuff. And so many times Celebrimbor manages to escape such until Sauron has to catch him again. It's really ridiculous. And then to end their storyline, I thought it was just so abrupt and out of nowhere, anticlimactic. It just all of a sudden cuts to them and you see Celebrimbor there on the ground with 5 arrows in him, dying, and Sauron shoots another one into him. So they've skipped the whole scene of him just using Celebrimbor as target practice as his way of killing him, and then eventually gets him on the spike and lifts him up with that. So you had this big build up to what was going to be the climax. We all knew what Celebrimbor's fate's going to be, whether you know the source material or not, but still, it was really abrupt and anticlimactic. It was just out of nowhere. So yeah, to summarize my thoughts on this show, the common theme across all 7 of these storylines is that so much of what has happened is not earned. They have payoffs to things, but they don't feel they don't feel earned in any way because they haven't been correctly or sufficiently set up. This is the problem. It's just happening over and over and over again. It feels like, and that's why you get this sense with this show when you watch each episode that so much happens, but also nothing happens. And it's because they jump to the ending and you feel like, okay, you've got a whole arc, but then when you really think it through, you didn't get the arc. They skipped the arc. They went from one point to the other and skipped the in-between. It happens over and over, and it drives me crazy because the central premise of this show, the central concept, I can forgive that they've skipped thousands of years of storylines and they've just jumbled them all together to make it out as if all these things happened within a few year period. I can forgive that because you can't tell a show with the same characters over thousands of years. It's not going to work. But even then, they're doing that. I'll forgive that. But then even when they do it, they just can't get it right. So I'm giving grace. I try to give grace to the show when I can, but it doesn't earn it from me at any turn. It's ridiculous and baffling. And look, I'm trying to compare this to season 1. Season 1 was atrocious. I hated it. And my thoughts on this are roughly the same. The only thing I could say is that there was that episode in there, might be 5 or 6, where I thought, okay, this is better or not as bad as season 1. And the reason for that wasn't because of anything they did, but rather things they didn't do, which was overly use the storylines that we were less interested in, like the Half-Orcs, like the Men of the South, and all that. Because they trimmed them down a lot, it felt like, okay, at least I'm not as bored out of my mind as I was in season 1. So if season 1 for me was like a 2 out of 10, this one for me, I'm probably going to give like a 3 out of 10. And that's me being generous. I mean, boy, like I couldn't do enough like criticisms of the show in one spoiler video. It'd take me hours to go through it all, and I'm not going to bore you all with them today, but I've given you my general feel, hopefully given you my general feel of each of those storylines and what I saw is sometimes going right with them, and many things that I saw going wrong with each of them. But they are each significantly flawed, and some of them in the same way, some of them in different ways. But it's just this show, I don't know how they pull it together from here. They're supposedly aiming for 5 seasons with this show. I don't know how they get there, because where they are right now, all that's basically left to happen is the fall of Numor and the Battle of the Last Alliance. You could easily fit those 2 things into 1 season. This does not need to be stretched out over another 3. This show is already stretched out well beyond what it needs to be. But here we are. We're at the end of season 2, probably 2 or so years away at least from season 3. We'll just have to see what happens. But yeah, look, that's my thoughts on season 2 of The Rings of Power, guys. Not impressed at all. In fact, I kind of hated it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. What did you think of my review? What did you think of the show? Did you have more positive, negative thoughts? Whatever it is, I want to hear them all. Thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.